so grateful to be here today and to join you. And thank you so much, Naya, for that awesome introduction and her 4.0 grade point average and never got less than an A. That's awesome. So I want to talk to you about how do you get a seat at the table? So with a show of hands, how many of you have ever felt like you just didn't have a seat at the table? Okay, oh, that's a lot of us. Okay, great. So I'm going to talk to you about times in my career where I felt like I didn't have a seat at the table, but I have an inspirational woman that I want to introduce you to that's going to talk to us about how we fix that. So some of you need an introduction, some of you don't, but this is my shero. And notice I said shero, not hero. And my shero is Shirley Anita Chisholm. She's the first Black woman to be elected to Congress. She's also the first woman to run for the presidential nomination for a major political party. And although she did not succeed as president, she did serve and was elected to 7 terms in Congress. And this year marks the 50th anniversary of her 1968 run to election for Congress. And also, I want to just point out this year, we also have another milestone. We've had an unprecedented 256 women elected into public office in the US. And that's amazing. But we all know there's so much more work to be done. And so this is why she's my shero. Shirley Chisholm said, if they don't give you a seat at the table, you bring a folding chair. So, TEDxIndianapolisWomen, I brought my folding chair. Do you have yours? So I want to talk to you about times in my career when I felt like I needed a folding chair. Instances where I had to have that chair for myself, and instances where someone else pulled up that chair for me. And I want to talk to you about how we can pull up that chair for others. So I'll start a little bit about my journey. So I can't say like Naya that I had a 4.0 grade point average, but as a little kid, I was born in Texas, in Dallas, and my family moved to California. And we moved to an area that wasn't quite diverse. So I showed up and I had about 50 pigtails in my hair, and I was snaggletooth, I was missing some teeth in the front, about 5 or 6, and then I had this mean Texas Southern accent. And I started school in the middle of the year, and you know how that can often be tough. And I'd walk in classrooms and go, who's gonna look like me? Who's gonna identify with me? Who's gonna understand my journey or that I'd be able to relate to? Now, you know, at the time I didn't have the language for that. Now we know that's called allies. I was walking in that room looking for allies. And that's a narrative that's followed me throughout my career journey. Representation and how much that matters to me, that when I enter a room that I can relate to someone, or that I'll find an ally, or that I'll see myself reflected back in the rooms that I enter. And so that was one of the things that always resonated with me. So I'll fast forward to my career journey. I work for Salesforce. We're one of the largest tech employers in this city. And also, I was able to do a PR and communications career for about 15 years. But one of the things I always did was I always had side projects that helped me advocate for women or people of color. Little things that I would do to make sure that our voices were heard. Little things that I would do to make sure we were brought to the forefront. Because again, it was important to me that I saw myself represented elsewhere. So one of these side projects percolated with me for about 2 years. And I had this idea and I had it on a PowerPoint presentation. And I would show it to anyone who'd listen. Hey, I got this idea, you wanna see it? Hey, I got an idea, can I tell you about it? And I would show folks my idea. And it took courage, but it also took help to get to the finish line. So one day, I was on a train with one of our women senior executives at Salesforce, and I showed her my presentation. And I said, hey, I've got this great idea. And let me tell you what my idea was. And this is a few years ago. It was a women's summit at a tech conference where you look on stage and one full day of programming would be all women, whether they're talking about technology, innovation, or leadership, and more importantly, talking about the role of women in tech. Now, this was somewhat unorthodox a few years back because women are so underrepresented in the tech industry. Well, unbeknownst to me, this executive took my idea and entered into rooms that I did not have a seat, tables and rooms and chairs that I wasn't privy to. And she took my idea forward. And more importantly, she kept my name on the idea. So all of a sudden, 2 years after percolating with this idea, I gained the approvals to have the Dreamforce Women Summit. And this was a one-day summit, and you looked on stage, and there were all these powerful leaders from Susan Wojcicki, Patricia Arquette, Gayle King, Jessica Alba, all having these amazing conversations about how we move women forward. But what I tell you that story to tell you, my idea got into rooms that I wasn't in, but the executive was sure to keep my name on the idea, to give me credit for my idea, to let me execute on my idea, and that was the rhetorical someone pulling up a folding chair for me. I want to tell you another story that has to do with the folding chair, of course. So around 2016, I'm still working at Salesforce at this time, and my company, like many other companies and senior leaders, were really wrestling with the conversation around Black Lives Matter. How do companies weigh in? Do they weigh in or not? What does that mean, and how do you advocate for your employees? So I had this chance meeting with our CEO at the time, and he sent me an email and said, hey, do you want to have a call? So let me give you some scope and understanding of that. I wasn't a senior executive at Salesforce. I wasn't really a big deal. I was kind of someone working 3 or 4 rows down in the hierarchy at the company. For the CEO to reach out to me and ask me for my opinion, to ask me about my journey. And what was so stunning was the first question he asked me was, Molly, tell me about your experience as a Black woman working at Salesforce. And I was shocked. No one's ever asked me a question like that in a corporate work environment. No one's taken the time to care about my journey or understand how I lived my life. And the thing about me is I tell you no lies if you ask me a question. So I said, well, let me tell you. And the first thing I said was, there's a bit of loneliness. And that loneliness comes from, I don't see many people that look like me when I walk down a hall. That loneliness comes because I don't see people that look like me in my senior ranks. I don't see those role models, those shoes and paths that I can step into because they came before me, whether that's women or people of color. And last, I shared that I felt like the tech industry wasn't really doing enough to understand the journey of underrepresented minorities and women, to be so underrepresented in a community and to understand what that feels like and what that means. So this conversation went from problems to solutions to planning, and here I am on this phone with the CEO for 45 minutes, and we started to develop a plan of how we move forward to make Salesforce more inclusive, make it more diverse. And before that call ended, he said, hey, Molly, I think you should take a job for 6 months as a project and kind of work on this a little bit, and let's see what we can kind of think of ideas for a few months. And I said, absolutely. I did not hesitate. And that is him providing a seat at the table for me. But more importantly, I was able to turn that passion and that side project and that 6-month project into my full-time job. And now I'm happy to say I wake up every day and I get to advocate for LGBTQ rights and gender equality and racial and social justice. But why I tell you that story was I wasn't a C-suite executive. I wasn't a very big deal. And this is a picture of us at the White House for Equal Pay Day, and I'll get back to equal pay. But I tell you that because when the opportunity came, I had the passion, I had a plan, and I took that seat at the table. And that's what's important, that when that seat is provided, that you're ready to step into that. So now I want to talk to you about how you can bring a folding chair for others. So I'm pretty sure you don't all have a folding chair in your purse right now, right? But we're going to talk about, metaphorically, how you can do that as well. So one thing we want to make sure we do is bring a folding chair to advocate for others. How many of you have ever experienced being the only in a room? The only woman, the only person of color, the only person with a disability, the only woman who might be Muslim wearing a hijab? There's a loneliness that comes with being the only. There's a term I learned, it was called onlyness. It was lonely of the only. Right? So when you see that person that's the only in the room, it's important that we advocate for them. And I saw a lot of hands go up. But I tell you, if one of you is sitting there thinking, I've never been an only, then that's what we call privilege. And I'm going to thank you in advance for using your privilege to advocate for others. Next is amplifying the voices of women. So I'm going to talk about meeting culture. How many of you have ever been in a meeting and a woman has an idea and she says it and it's largely ignored? But then someone else says the same idea, and sometimes it's a man, says the same idea, and everyone celebrates it, and you're right, and that's a great idea. And they give him credit, and she's sitting there thinking, wait a minute, what just happened to me? And I saw on Twitter, in terms of giving credit, this woman called that a he-peat. So he repeated what she said, and he got credit, right? A he-peat, right? I thought that was the best term ever. So when a he-peat happens, it's really important that we amplify the voices of women, and it's three things. You've got to acknowledge the voice of women in rooms. Make sure that we make space. That's women, that's introverts, that's people of color. Make space for them. You want to credit. Give folks credit where credit is due. So in my example, when I had an idea for a plan, an executive took my idea forward in rooms that I wasn't in, she was sure to make sure I received the credit, that I was able to execute on my idea. That credit is important. And the third thing, you got to repeat. Repeat that. I hear you, sister. What you just said was, and that doesn't have to be a real sister. That could be any woman in the room, however you want to live your life. But the point is that you acknowledge, you credit, and you repeat the voices of women. That's what's important. And so we've talked about advocating and amplifying, but I want to talk about equal pay for equal work. It is 2018, and we are still talking about equal pay. So here we are, where on average in the US, a woman makes 80 cents to the man's dollar. But skirt, I need like a record scratch there. Just yesterday, a report came out that said, actually, that number's not really accurate. It's worse than that. A woman makes 49 cents on average to a man's dollar. And this new number, 49 cents, says we forgot to take into account women's taking a step back from the workplace, whether that's caretaking for children, caretaking for parents, maternity leave. And so they said, actually, women are leaving half the money on the table. So what does this mean? That means that, yes, advocating and amplifying, each of us can individually do and make that happen. But we need corporations and leaders to take a stance and do an equal pay audit and assessment and commit to closing the gender wage gap for equal pay for equal work, right? And now I want to talk about the great state of Indiana. You're number 49, and no one's ever celebrated being number 49. 73 cents on average to the man's dollar, one of the lowest in the nation for the state of Indianapolis. So I implore you, it's time we talk to our leaders, our corporations, our legislators, and we talk to them about equal pay for equal work. So here we are. And another stat you should know, the World Economic Forum says it will take 100 years to reach global parity. I'm not that young, y'all. I don't have time for 100 years. So I implore on all of us to make that a priority. So let's get back to that seat at the table. So we're all going to commit to making changes around equal pay. We're bringing a folding chair to amplify those voices of women, to stop he-peating as it continues. And I'm asking you to advocate for others. So TEDxIndianapolisWomen, I have my folding chair. Do you have yours? Thank you.